Secret of Flight, a series of programs on aerodynamics. Program 9, Different Aircraft Systems. Your host is Dr. Alexander Lippisch.
You know, if you would ask somebody today to sketch up an airplane of the early days of aviation, he would certainly draw up such an old biplane with all its struts and wires racing, a real, what we call the wire entanglement. And you are wondering why in these early times they went to such an effort to make such a complicated structure as their first aircraft. Now, to understand this, you should think about the condition under which they had to build these aircraft. First of all, well, the engine power was certainly not as abundant as our engine power is today. But when you think, for instance, of the Wright brothers engine, well, it had 12 horsepower, and the weight with all the things on it was almost 200 pounds. So there wasn't much power. And as you have heard in our last program, the power to fly consists of two portions. One portion is to make the aircraft go, to overcome the drag, the resistance. Another portion is necessary to make the lift. Now, you want to reduce this as much as possible. How could you probably do it? First of all, if you go very slow, then you wouldn't have much drag. So this power due to drag would be small. But if you want to go slow, then you have to have lots of area, wing area, to make lift at this low speed. So what you needed was an aircraft with large wing area, and on the other hand, since weight had to be lifted, the thing had to be very light. Now, at this time, you didn't have much choice in materials. You had just wood and things like this. So you had to build a framework which was as light as possible and had as much wing area as you could think of. And in this way, the biplane was the best solution. But there was another advantage. And this advantage is that the power to make the lift is actually smaller if you divide the lift into the two surfaces instead of having it all on one surface. You remember the last program we have talked about these wingtip vortices, and then they actually extract a certain amount of energy which you have to produce with your engine. This is the energy to make the lift. Now, if you have a structure with two superimposed wings instead of one wing, then you necessarily have, instead of two wingtip vortices, you have four wingtip vortices. And the energy to generate these tip vortices is not direct proportional to their magnitude, but is proportional to the square of their magnitude. And so a simple calculation will show you that if you divide the lift on two superimposed surfaces, you actually save about 50% of the power. Look at this. We have here a monoplane wing, and we have on each side a tip vortex. Let's suppose this vortex has about the magnitude of 10. So then the energy to generate the tip vortices would be the square of 10. That means 100 here and 100 there. Makes together 200. If I take now 2 wings, then I have only half of the lift on each wing, and therefore I have only half of the magnitude of the tip vortex on these wingtips. That means that each of these tip vortices on the biplane would have only the magnitude of 5, and the squares of it would give here 2 times 25, here 25, and there 25, and there 25, and there 25. This is together here 50, and there 50, and what we come out is an amount of energy which is only 100. That means half of what we have to do for the monoplane. The only problem is that due to the superposition of these 2 planes, you have a certain interaction so that you don't gain the full amount of 50%, but you gain about 75%. On the other hand, you have interaction from one wing surface to the other, which we probably can see much better if we look here at our model in the smoke tunnel. And I can show you how the flow acts. If I, for instance, change the angle of attack as this, or decreasing it as this, I can also change now the position of the wing above each other, what we call the stagger. You see, when I pull it forward like this, then I get what we call a positive stagger. That means the distance between the leading edges here, measured in the vertical plane, is what we call the stagger of the biplane. This is now positive stagger, and if we go backwards, then we have negative stagger. The usual biplanes had mostly positive stagger because you get more lift with such configuration. To see this more precisely, we have made some slow motion pictures of the pulsating flow in a biplane configuration, and you see here that due to the interaction of the planes, you have now 3 different general speeds. The flow above the surface of the upper wing has the highest speed. The flow between the surface has mainly the main speed, and the flow underneath the lower surface is retarded and gives higher pressure. It is therefore that the lower surface of the upper wing and the upper surface of the lower wing, due to the interaction of the pressure in the channel between the wings, has not much action. Some pictures can be seen here with different type of stagger, and you see that the main configuration of the velocities is almost the same. The change is not very considerable. Now, if from all these considerations the biplane was such a good design, why did we then change to the monoplane? Well, there were 2 main reasons. First of all, after the First World War, where the airplane was mainly used for military purposes, engineers began to think about the use of the airplane as a means of transportation. Now, if you do this, then you think that you have to have some kind of economy of transportation, which means that you have to have low fuel consumption over a certain distance. Fuel consumption where distance counts for economy, as it is on your car, where you think of gallons per mile. So you had to fly faster to get higher economy, so that you could fly with the same amount of fuel over a larger distance. And then you had to reduce the drag first. Now, to reduce the drag, you needed to take off all this crap, all the struts, wiring, and all the external things which were built on these old biplanes. What could you do? Well, let's think of it. Could do it probably this way. You could have here your biplane, and you could think, all right, if I take these both surfaces and put them all together so that I get one thick surface put together from two, and then I can take these outer members and bring them in here. And so I would have a structure which would contain all members to make the thing stiff inside of the wing, and I would have a very smooth outer surface. So instead of having this conception of thin wings with struts in between and lots of wires, you have a thick section with a spar which now contains these struts and cross members inside of the wing. You just have reduced the height of this configuration. The first people to think about such thing were the Germans, I think, and it was Hugo Junkers who, in his wind tunnel in Aachen, tested the first thick wing sections. And it was, on the other hand, the famous designer of the World War I fighters, Anthony Fokker, who used this research work for building the first thick wing commercial monoplanes. Actually, this development, which began towards the end of the First World War, did not come into use, really, generally speaking, until one event showed that the aircraft was grown out of his childhood. And this was the crossing of the Atlantic by Charles Lindbergh, where it was shown to everybody that now the aircraft was a large range means of transportation, and crossing the oceans, going over thousands of miles, could make the aircraft as a usable mean for all kinds of civilian purposes. The question was again to improve this by reducing the drag. Now there was another idea of reducing the drag. We took all the outer structure away. Well, what was left was apparently the fuselage. If we had anyhow a thick wing section, and we could build a large wing with a thick section, couldn't we probably place all the passengers, the engines, the fuel tanks, and probably the undercarriage into this thick wing and make a flying wing, an ideal aircraft which would not have any outer structure and all lifting surface only? Well, also this idea, which originates with Hugo Junkers, is actually quite old. The patent is from 1913. But it did take quite some time until we were able to think of a design which would make it possible to design such an aircraft. Because now, since you take the fuselage away, well, then you have to have the tail units, the elevator, and the rudder on the wing itself. Otherwise, you could not control the wing. So you have to have a wing for lifting and a wing for controlling. This could be done. And I will show you here a little model where I will perform this change of a conventional aircraft into an all-wing aircraft, while you may look to it. See, this is normal little model, and we can fly it very nicely. I fly it probably over there. You see, it flies pretty nice. So, now, what could we do to get rid of all this? We have to put, apparently, the tail units on the wing. So, all right. Let's take this off and make first a sweepback wing. A wing which goes arrow-like to the rear, which is outer surface. Excuse me, I have to take my eyes, you know. So now I put this little triangle here in front, so that we have a real sweepback wing. Now we take the tail unit off, and we take part of the fuselage off because we don't need it anymore. And then we divide this into two and put this one on the right-hand side on the left-hand wing, and the left-hand side on the right-hand wing, and attach it there. Because due to the sweepback, we have now a leverage for these control or stabilization surfaces. And if I am a little able to do that, you see, then I attach these surfaces now to the wing tip. So, and we have now an all-wing aircraft. And you will see that this flies very well. I can even take a little weight off. Now, and there it goes. You see, we have, in this way, found a mean to build an all-wing aircraft with sweepback wing. Now, after all this refinement of the monoplane configuration, the way was free to build a very nice and efficient airplane. And so we went from 200 miles up to 300 miles, and with some more refinements and some better engines, we got from 300 miles to 400 miles, and then from 400 miles to 500 miles. And suddenly, you know, there was somebody who told us, well, that if we would proceed and get into the range of 700 miles, there at 770 miles per hour, there would be a critical speed, the speed of sound. And some mathematicians, theoretical people, aerodynamicists, well, they figured out with big equations, you know, that in this range, beyond the speed of sound, all our original conception of laws of fluid motion would change considerably, and there would be completely different conditions for the flow in the supersonic range. So we should begin from scratch and learn new type of designs for the supersonic aircraft. Well, this was too bad, you know. When you face such a problem and you think to get this transition from subsonic to supersonic, you search for some means of delaying this sudden change and of having something which at least would it make it possible for you to extend this transition over a certain range. And again, it was the theory, you know, who predicted very well that if we would use, instead of the straight wings, the sweepback wings on such high-speed aircraft, we would be able to enter into the so-called transonic and supersonic range with the otherwise normal aircraft configuration. In this way, we achieved transonic and supersonic speeds. But you know, it's very well to fly with a Mach number of 2 and 3. But there's one thing, you can't get home with it. Oh no, you have to get home with 0 speed, and you have to get home with a Mach number of 0. And therefore, our problem was not only to produce a high-speed aircraft, but to make an aircraft configuration which also had a certain amount of good properties for takeoff and landing. And to show you some of these high-speed wing configurations with sweepback in the low-speed range and their special flow characteristics, we have here in our tunnel one of those models where you can see the low-speed flow configuration on a high-speed aircraft wing. And we can see how the flow works in the low-speed range on this model. With these control wheels, I can change the angle of attack, and when I now increase the angle, as you see it now, then you see a very distinct change in the flow. When you think of the straight wing, the flow went straight over it. Here, due to the sweepback, we have a convergence towards the center, and the flow is more narrow behind it than it is in front. On the other hand, we have again 2 pretty distinct tip vortices on the tips of the wing. It comes out that such swept wing configuration is not very efficient. To make it even better for the very high speed, you had to sweep the wings more back. And what you come out with is then that if you take such a large sweepback like this, you better connect the both wing tips together and fill this part out and make a triangular wing, which we call the delta wing, and which I, fortunately or unfortunately, you don't know, tested for the first time. This is one of the old models which I designed in '44. We have now, to observe some of the flow conditions of the delta wing, we have made some tests on flow pictures which we show you now here, and which are taken from a flying model with smoke on it, so that you can see how these large tip vortices develop now along the whole leading edge. Actually, what this delta wing represents is just a wing which is put together from two wing tips. We flew this in a hangar, and the smoke is produced by a smoke generator on the model itself and comes out through holes on the upper surface. If you make the wing a little bit thicker, then you would have a delta wing with a thick wing section as you see it here in the smoke tunnel. And you can observe very well the large convergence of the flow lines when the thing comes to a larger angle of attack. To see this more distinct, we have pictures from our 3D tunnel where we have a thin delta wing model, and you see here the flow when we change the angle of attack from a 0 angle to a larger angle. You can see very well the two wingtip vortices which are on the leading edges of this wing. On our next program, we will talk about all kinds of high lift devices. And to show you some example of a very high lift wing, I have here a special wing, which is just nothing than a circular cylinder. And if I rotate this and fly it forward, then the circulation around it and the translation causes very high lift. This is called a rotor, and you might see it fly here. Now watch this. You see, it flies beautiful and with very low speed. We will talk about other types of high lift devices and of the system to make what we call today super circulation. Goodbye and auf Wiedersehen.
You have just seen different aircraft systems, the ninth in a series of programs explaining the secret of flight. Your host has been Dr. Alexander Lippisch, Director of the Aeronautical Research Laboratories of the Collins Radio Company. This program was produced for the Educational Television and Radio Center by the State University of Iowa.